to the July edition of the You Already Own It Office Hours Call. I'm Ken Nubler, one of Planet's cloud strategists, and I'm very excited about today's very timely topic of zero trust. Next slide, please, Jake.
Okay, a little bit of a difficulty here. Stand by. Okay, sorry.
Great. The You Already Own It team members are Bob Ballard, Director of Sales and Cloud. We got cloud strategist George Scott, Scott Dowling, Miguel Wood, Matt Nevins, and of course myself, Ken Nubler. And special guest today, we've got Jake Necessary, who's one of our Planet's security architects, and he'll be presenting today's topic of zero trust, the business challenges of it, and how to operationalize it into your environment, which is kind of like the secret thing here we're going to talk about. The You Already Own It, okay, next, You Already Own It teams consists of Mary Tucker, who keeps us all to our commitments and getting answers to your questions. We try to get those all within a 24-hour turnaround. And of course, our Steve Winter, our Executive Vice President of Business Development and Delivery. Next slide. Just a reminder for all of our You Already Own It customers that you can always email us at youalreadyownit@go-planet.com alias. And again, we'll try to get those answers to you within 24 hours. It goes out to the entire cloud strategist group. So if someone's on vacation, certainly somebody can answer that question on their behalf. And one other thing is that we also have a blog available on our website. If you haven't seen that, please take a look at that. All the history of our blogs are on there as well as the blog for today's topic of discussion. So it'll be up there shortly after the webinar, and we'll also send that out as the follow-up email as well. Also, we record all these sessions, so if you can't make it, if you want to share it with a colleague, by all means, please share the recordings with your colleagues. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jake Necessary, who will talk to you more about zero trust. Take it away, Jake.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm glad to be able to present this topic because I'm really passionate about operationalizing security. And so a couple things, a couple housekeeping things. There'll be some slides that have diagrams. I'm not going to dive into those diagrams heavily. There's some points I want to show on those slides. But as we work through this, if anyone has a question, just kind of bring that up. I'm hoping to conclude about 5 or 10 minutes early, and then we can take questions at that point. I'm not sure if y'all have seen the Verizon data breach report before. It is freely available. So I would grab that if you can, take a peek at it. It gives a lot of great insight. In 2020, there were roughly 160,000 reported security incidents. As we kind of flow into the next slide, I've got some stats that I want to share with you. I generally like to have quantitative numbers out there so people are aware of kind of the situation. But so Verizon does intake a bunch of reports, roughly 160,000 for 2020. Then they qualify them. Were they actually a security incident or were they a breach? And so you can see in 2020, there's a whole bunch of things reported. Though I really like to highlight the things in orange. So financially, the motivator is typically financially based in 86% of those activities. And then kind of the shocking external actor that scares me the most is that it's organized crime. In fact, with some further research, we found that organized crime is actually, this is their mainstream for money now. It's overtaken the drug trade is cybercrime. And so it's all of our resources are really at risk out there. One of the things that I like to do is come up with a motto and really talk towards this. So I believe deeply that cybersecurity is a business challenge. It's not a technical problem. I feel like we have the right tools out there. It's just we are challenged often in operationalizing those tools. So that's really kind of the motto, and the mantra around this whole presentation is it's a business challenge, not necessarily a technical problem. So some key concepts. I am a risk management kind of guy. My focus is to analyze security and understand the risk. In order to do that, you need a framework. So we'll talk about one of those in just a moment. But also design with security first. And I know this is probably a drum everyone beats, but the reality is, I think we often strap security on at the end of our project instead of involving security kind of in the initial discussions. And that's why I'm going to kind of talk towards this idea of a security toll booth, which you will see looks very similar to a change review board kind of attitude. And when you're developing a security program, you want to encourage high visibility, situational awareness, and continuous security management. I always say PTO is think people, tools, and operations. When you're talking about a security program, you can have the best people in the world, but if they don't have the right tool, they can't do the job. You can have a bunch of tools, but if you don't have the right processes, so you can kind of see they're all kind of linked together. So one example of a risk management framework is NIST RMF. I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with this idea, but the real goal of implementing a risk management framework is to establish kind of a strong foundation, so you can pick and select, categorize the controls that you want. And then the other thing, and kind of another thing that I like, is the ability to get executive sponsorship. So if you have a documented risk management framework that's kind of business focused, and then you're able to get sign off on that ability to execute against the framework, you'll be in a situation where executives are supporting you, and it's a lot easier to kind of go to the well and get funding to implement the controls you need to maintain a strong network. This is one of those architecture sides. I just threw this out here not to talk towards it because it's very busy, but Microsoft has recently released a new version of the cybersecurity reference architecture. It is a very good slide deck. Many of the slides I have in here are adapted from that deck. This is one of them, but you can see that we have a pretty hefty toolbox at our hands, right? We can pick the exact tool that we need to execute the job that we want to do and to assign towards a control. And so I think it's just important to know that, again, this is not a technical problem. It's more of a business challenge. Kind of talking towards this security first toll booth. I'm not sure if y'all have heard of Cloud Center of Excellence approach. It's very much like a change review board. So in the graphic that you see with the left cloud where it says beginning, the whole idea is that you kind of put the Cloud Center of Excellence as your brain in the center, essentially. So as you adopt new services, or you're implementing new things in the cloud, or a brand new application is being deployed, you really need to kind of flow that through this Cloud Center of Excellence. And usually it contains people that are both business related and technical related. And often you'll see finance and legal on these types of teams as well. Because as we're moving to the cloud, or deploying a new instance in the cloud, really have to think through that, because you want that security first idea. Primarily the members of this group would be technical in nature, but finance and legal would have activities. And so you're going to merge kind of the idea of a risk management framework, which I would coin as business, and then the technical framework, such as the Microsoft cybersecurity reference architecture. Those are used together in this toll booth. And it basically, how are we going to get from the beginning to the destination, and what security controls we want to enact, and is this really where we want to place this application? So this is kind of the way that I think about security first and a toll booth. I think we've all seen kind of this zero trust principles. This is kind of the core, the initial idea around zero trust, is verify explicitly, use least access, and assume breach. These are the core items that we talk towards. But this definition has absolutely expanded over the last even year to include some other activities. So when we talk about Microsoft's core principles, it's really kind of these three pillars. However, we are going to introduce something from the open group in the next slide. As we look at this, though, what is zero trust? When we talk about zero trust, it's very much like the classic approach. It's very much different than the classic approach, where we would place all of our assets in the this jail, if you will, and we would protect it from the outside world. But as we move towards zero trust, the whole idea is that each component that we have, each resource has its own individual lock. And so the zero trust is about kind of what Microsoft indicated, least access, restrictive access, verify explicitly, assume breach across the board. And but we do want to kind of expand that definition a little bit. And I guess the reason why we're really concerned about this now is if we look at the world we live in today, we have people aren't showing up in an office any longer. Our resources are not in our data center any longer. They're in the cloud. And so we've lost the idea of perimeter security. I like to liken it towards a rubber band security. We need to be able to expand our security to encompass wherever our employees are. For example, they're at Starbucks getting a coffee on the wireless. We need to be concerned that there could be a problem there. And we have to assume these types of things as we go through. I think COVID and the Delta variant are going to cause more people to work from home. And I think people are going to stay working from home because of cost. It's more cost effective. So as we expand our digital footprint, we also are expanding what we need to protect against. And that's why the rigid kind of walls of a perimeter network are obsolete any longer. And so as we move into zero trust, which is heavily involving identity-based access and other kind of rules engines, we're able to really produce this rubber band security where we're wrapping our security net across different things as they come and leave our environment. And this goes on to the open group. Now, the open group is quite an interesting group of people. They have come across 11 core principles, and you'll see that the Microsoft principles are kind of interwoven into these. Microsoft absolutely participates in this open group, as well as other tech giants that are out there. But as we talk about what are the 11 principles according to the open group, it really just goes across these ideas. So first of all, guardrails and governance you see here are some areas that we don't see in the Microsoft framework necessarily. And this is the magic sauce. This is the operations side of things. How are we going to guide our people, empower them is probably even a better word. How do we reduce our risk? How do we align all those things are all towards these 11 principles. And as we kind of build out the technology, least privilege like Microsoft, we're now focused on assets and not on perimeters, and the whole control activity. This all builds this great kind of story around mitigating risk in our environments. So we've come up with this kind of idea of a zero trust manifesto, and this is where we've kind of, what is our definition of zero trust? Because everybody and their uncle's got a different definition. So when we talk about zero trust, we've really kind of focused in on 3 components. I've already showed you one of them, which is the 11 trust principles. Also, the federal government has produced a zero trust architecture document along with their cybersecurity framework. But the 800-207 is a great tool to help understand how the government approaches zero trust. And then we're also kind of mingling in Microsoft's best practice guidance, which kind of exists across 6 domains. So we've even heard, obviously, the president was even using the word zero trust as far as protecting, as we've witnessed some of these breaches recently. But we absolutely believe that zero trust is at the heart of your cyber defense. If you look through security through your 6 domains through that kind of lens, it will help you strengthen that activity. And these other supporting documents all together kind of come out with a plan towards zero trust. And I alluded to this earlier a little bit. So a healthy security program really has 3 components or 3 pieces of the puzzle. So we have to have people, we have to have educated people that are trained in the art of using that tool. The cloud is a new world. The tools are vast, as we saw from the cybersecurity reference architecture. The skill sets to operate those tools properly are different than they were before. And when we talk about tools, you have to have the proper toolbox, an adequately equipped toolbox to implement. And then kind of what brings it all together is really the process, the operations around that. And when we think about operations, what do we do? Are we doing on a daily, a quarterly, yearly, biannual, annual basis? And kind of wrapping our arms around that to-do list, if you will, to being proactively secure. Just a quick discussion around Microsoft's 6 domains of trust. I actually chose this graphic because it looks like a fan to me. And I believe that operations is really the center of the fan, and each of the blades is somewhat of a domain of security. So, for example, Microsoft has identified kind of a rapid way of deploying zero trust, and it's across kind of these activities: identity services, network, data, devices, infrastructure, and applications. And so that's one of the ways that we like to analyze this. But also the circle of operations is quite interesting, as far as it really does me no good to have a bunch of identity tools if I don't operate them on a daily basis. And it's the same for all these. So it's imperative to kind of have what I'm calling a proactive infosec calendar, or PIC, kind of a list of proactive maintenance activities that you do in all these categories. So what reports do I generate today? What automations do I run in Sentinel? All these are types of things that are a part of operations, and I think are critical to the success of zero trust. So just to kind of reiterate, zero trust is not buying a bunch of tools. It's absolutely operating a bunch of tools, right, with the right people. And to me, that's the secret sauce on this operational fan. Job leveling. So there's this concept. I'm not sure if you guys have seen. There's a framework called the NICE framework. It's the National Institute for Cybersecurity Education, and the federal government has come up with a really awesome way of classifying jobs and what a proper cybersecurity team would look like. And in a lot of places, you've got one person, so everybody has to wear multiple hats, and sometimes you have a whole team. So, but as we look at job leveling, this is a critical evolution that has to happen. If you've never been in the cloud, or you have someone that's only worked on firewalls and on-prem security solutions, when you go to the cloud, things are different. You can mimic, say, your architecture and then put it in the cloud the same way, but you're really giving up a lot of the advantages of security. So there has to be some job leveling that occurs where people are kind of shown the new tools that are available and how to operate them, and then really assume that in the cloud responsibility, right, and to really fix things as we have problems, and operationalize the team using that adequate toolbox. I would say that it's also important to undergo a mapping exercise, as you can see underneath the understanding misnomers of zero trust. It's important to map like security functions to people, and then everyone should do that as a part of releveling themselves. So Microsoft has generated what they call the ramp plan. We are modifying that a little bit, but I'm going to build this slide out. But there's some things that you can do kind of immediately to have rapid modernization, and there's some things that you can do as needed. We are a proponent of being visible in the environment, so we really like to take all of our signals from different systems and kind of get them into one place. I know everyone beats the single pane of glass drum. The reality is you probably should strive for as few panes of glass as you can achieve. Hopefully it's a single pane of glass, but the reality is that's not always possible. But it is important that when you operationalize your zero trust, that the people operating the environment understand which panes of glass to view under what conditions. So what we're doing is we're literally making a list of things every year we need to check this, or every quarter we need to check that, or run this report. And that really helps you understand where to go to pull that data. And this will also help you if you have a few panes of glass with compliance checks, because you're going to get into a situation perhaps where they're going to ask for evidence, the auditors, and you'll need to generate that, and that needs to be a planned exercise. And so by being more proactive about conducting these activities, you can generate evidence as you go, and audits are much easier to understand. This is just an example of the compliance policy engine. I'm not sure if y'all have used this before, but this is one of the first things Microsoft recommends, and I would as well. If you think about the right-hand side of this slide, this is where our stuff is, right? These are our resources, our apps, our information is on the right-hand side. And then on the left, you have things that are accessing it. So you have users, you have devices, you have code, you have all kinds of applications are all accessing data on the right-hand side. So the whole idea of zero trust, especially in the identity side, is to understand that a user is accessing the environment from a managed PC. They are up to date on their endpoints, up to date on their patches. They're accessing the environment from a normal work location, or they're accessing the environment from an abnormal work location. And then that allows you to build a very distinct profile on the information and the resources. So for example, see, if you're checking mail from China, and that's not a normal place to work, you may prompt for two-factor, an additional factor, or you may deny access. And so it just understands that's where folks are coming from, and you can make that policy decision. If all your employees are in the US and no one should be traveling and accessing, then perhaps you set up a policy that disallows everyone except from the US kind of IP ranges. And then maybe you have an exception group that you put people in. So you create kind of a series of questions and answers around user access to data. And that allows you the opportunity to really narrow down access. In the old world, it would be user signs into VPN, user gets access to everything kind of deal. And in this world, this is where we're placing the lock specifically on each piece of information or resource that is out there. And that allows you to really rotate through this policy engine and build really strong policies. Let's see, let me go to the next slide. I think this is one of these bit more busier slides. This is kind of an example of how it would look if you kind of overlaid Microsoft technologies in there. And so it's definitely a complicated activity, but you're able to really wrap specific rules around access. And if you're not doing conditional access or multi-factor access, those are multi-factor activities, those are things you should immediately implement. Even if it's just the admins in your environment have multi-factor turned on all the time, that would be a highly suggested activity as well. But I just wanted to kind of show you a bigger picture around this, where you have some signals that you see at the bottom, and then you make a decision based off of kind of what the resources have, and then you enforce that policy. This is a whole different kind of animal than just, opening a port in a firewall, right, and going that route. Okay. I like to show this slide. This is absolutely from Microsoft's deck, but it's a great slide. So when we look at external threats, which I know statistically everyone, the actual numbers are generally 70-30. 70% of your attacks come from external, 30 come from internal. That number fluctuates up and down a little bit, but external always outweighs internal. There's this myth that that's not the case. But statistics show that the numbers are generally 70-30-ish percent, with external being on top. The issue is usually internal people have more access than external, you hope at least. and they are very much more of a threat. So it is important to combat both of them, but the reality is that external threats and internal threats both need to be protected against. As we kind of bring out some of these insider risks into this kind of picture, we see that across the top we've got some services like Defender for Office 365 for endpoint, MCAS, Definitive for identity and identity protection. All these things are external threats, and then we have insider risks as well. But kind of the magic sauce that we tend to talk about is having it in a SIEM SOAR or a way to get alerted. And in this case, we're using Azure Sentinel as an example. And it's important to also know that Sentinel is a SOAR, which means that you can orchestrate and automate what's happening for the next step. If this happens, then do Y, versus, hey, something happened and you wait for input. So I really like this slide because it really helps us understand how we can defend across all the attack chains that exist out there, both internally and externally. And again, we're verifying, we're assuming risk and breach all the time across all these activities. So if we design with that security first attitude in line, then we're in a situation where we're better off. Okay, so security operations, kind of getting to the heart of things. So I kind of put this up there. It's the modernization of operations. Really is around the idea of using Azure Security Center, Azure Sentinel, or your SIEM SOAR of choice. I think it's important to also know that operationalizing, to me, is about being A, proactive, and B, reactive. So I think we often are less proactive than what we should be. And so I kind of hinted around to this already. I got this kind of idea from being on a submarine for a few years. We had a maintenance schedule. It was called a PMS system, but I kind of think this is a good approach as well here. This is where we have preventive maintenance. Essentially, today my on-call guy comes in the office. He's the on-call security person. What does he have to do today? What should he be viewing? What should he be reading? What reports should be sent to the group? So even at a daily basis, you have somewhat of a snapshot of what your security posture is. And then there are things that should happen weekly. There's some logs that need to be reviewed on a weekly basis because it would be administratively impossible to do it on a daily basis. Same for quarterly and monthly. There are definitely things that you do monthly. For example, vulnerability testing. I'm a proponent of running continuous vulnerability scans, reviewing those items weekly, briefly, and then acting upon them monthly, preferably after Patch Tuesday. So, when we talk about vulnerability scanning, how to operate that functionality really comes down to what are we going to do today, what are we going to do next week, monthly, quarterly, all those kind of secular activities. So when we talk about security operations, I'll move into the deck a little bit. It's all about really getting that single portal or single pane or a few pane of glasses as possible. So you want your kind of on-call guy or whoever's manning the watch that day essentially would have as few panels as possible to understand what's happening in the environment. But also you want to set up your environment for common activities so you can have some orchestration. But the whole idea is to get the signaling from all the applications and endpoints, identity, all the kind of areas that you're at, to get that signal sharing into the environment. And that will allow you to also overlay other data, like what's the risky reputation of this user? Are they experiencing impossible travel? Are they experiencing some other condition in the environment that we want to take special note to? And that all that gets wrapped around what does all that mean? How do I prioritize and orchestrate these activities? And then hopefully we have playbook automation turned on to where in some cases we can run activities automatically. We can have incident response plans that allow our operators of the environment kind of a step-by-step on when this condition occurs, do these, run these scripts, run these reports, do these types of things on a per incident basis. So this is where we bring all of our tools and our data together. I use the salad spinner, the old salad spinner analogies. We're throwing the lettuce and tomatoes and all that stuff in there and spinning it up, and we're producing kind of a salad that we can consume. And that allows us to really get that single portal experience. What's our security salad look like today? And then we move forward from there. There we go. Finally, so we talk about a model of security operations. I personally believe that you should integrate your Azure and your alerting and notifications with probably your help desk ticketing system if you have one. And this allows for proper management and documentation for compliance. So, and that happens really at that tier 1 activity, right? Users, if a user has a virus pop on their workstation, you're going to see it in the back-end systems, but they might call into the help desk. So I think it's important to have your users living in the same help desk system that you're getting notifications in as well. So when we talk about the kind of tier 1 activities, these are those high volume incidents that come in. Maybe we get some XDR alerts, users report, there might be a log review that happened, but all those types of things are really at that tier 1 level. And then as we move into tier 2, this is where things become more complex. The primary tools there will be XDR, Defender, and those types of things. And Ken just made a note about Sentinel has connectors for Snow. That is definitely one of the ways I would recommend that you do this. And it really is important to get your compliance work, your response work, your proactive work all documented in a way that you can pull it up for your compliance reasons later. So I'll go off script a little bit here, but if you're running a daily activity, that probably should be a ticket that's in your ticket system that that's assigned automatically to your on-call person or whatever queue you have. And that allows you to say, well, we ran these reports, we reviewed these reports, we're all good. And then, 8 months later, when you get an audit, you're not going to remember if you ran in those days, but you'll have a point in time where you did that activity. But as reactive type activities come along, like these tier 1 and tier 2 items that we're talking about here, eventually we're going to get to maybe a tier 3 that might, and so for example, tier 1 and 2 calls might be handled by your team, but tier 3 might be handled by Microsoft or Planet or some third party that you escalate kind of that proactive hunting attitude, the deep dive. Maybe your team does all 3 tiers. There's just different people involved, but it is critical for that integration. So you can track these activities and understand where you stand. And some of these alerts that come in may give you kind of an insight that not only is one computer impacted, this service is impacted, and this whole site is impacted. And you just don't know that yet, right? Because maybe it hasn't executed. So by using these tools, we can proactively hunt. We can identify hashes for specific activities, and then we can be more proactive about stopping that in the future. So I think it's critical to really have this model, this tier model of a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 activity. And when I spoke to job leveling, you may have people that are tier 3 in your organization. And so those functions would be mapped essentially to a group of people that handle that level of tier. So anyway, I've kind of beat the dead horse on this slide, but I think it's super important as you move forward with the operations model to be able to document what you're doing proactively and reactively in some system, probably a help desk. All right, so we'll talk a little bit about security operations. When we talk about security operations, we really have a couple of things to dwell on. Number one, they're tools, and then number 2, they're people. And so this slide is really going to talk more towards tools. So you can see that you have, and I've highlighted this kind of orange box. This is a Microsoft slide, but I did alter it a little bit. This orange box really repeats itself throughout people and tools. There's an overlay. So you can see that we have raw data at the very bottom that gets fed into the system. That data can come from Internet of Things stuff. It can come from your firewalls on-prem. It could come from security tools that you're using. So that may not be Microsoft, so it's that kind of that first box. But all that data really feeds into your environment. And then, and that gives these analysts and hunters really the idea of what they need to do to combat this. And then if we overlay some deep insights, so likely through an API integration, there are things that you get, data you get from Defender and in both Azure and Microsoft 365 that gives you some really good information. And then that's again building those hunters and analysts up, whether it's your internal teams or your outsourced teams, whatever they are. And then let's build this slide out and see all these things are really kind of reporting back into Azure Sentinel. There's AI, machine learning that help kind of craft things. It is a SIM. It's absolutely a SOAR. And I think what that allows you to do is to get incidents in the system. And this is pretty much the slide. So this is the tool slide, if you will. Let me just get the legend. I guess the legend should have popped first. And then this is really, if you look, the same big areas are here: raw data, deep insights, broad enterprise view. They're kind of across. But as we look at the kind of the personal view of this, we really need our teams to understand how to operate all the tools. And it can be somewhat overwhelming. So that's why I really think it's important to onboard a tool and ensure that you include kind of enough training for the individuals on that tool so they're prepared to operate it. And then ask the questions: what do I need to work to do if this incident occurs? What do I proactively need to do? So this is how the people overlay this and work to drive down mean time to remediate and acknowledge times. So these are all KPIs that you can measure around attacking this. Again, this is another trick of using a like Snow integration or ServiceNow integration would be to be able to pull KPIs from your team. So when we see something hit, how long does it take to acknowledge it? How long does it take to remediate it? Those are key numbers, and IT organizations should have a commitment to their customers, which are their user base, and essentially to the board to build out what those KPIs are going to be and what you strive to do, and are we hitting them? Because if we're not, that might be an indicator that we need to outsource the service. We might need to buy a different tool or use a different tool in a different way, or we need to change the process. So by setting quantitative alerting around how you operate, you can understand really where you're missing the mark. And also, it's important to understand qualitatively how you operate as well. Ask people how they feel about the response time. Understand and integrate the KPIs that the business wants into your IT KPIs, and then wrap all of it around your kind of single pane of glass and your help desk system to measure. And that is a great combination, I think, for all these things. All right, let me track into the next slide. I just wanted to throw this slide out here. This is actually a Microsoft slide. Again, I've doctored it a little bit, but it's a really good slide. As we build, I'll just build this thing out really quick. I hope I won't overbuild it. There we go. All right, so this will give us some kind of idea where we're at. But when we talk about managing risk, and you have to have an understanding of risk both from a technical perspective, from a supply chain perspective, and also from an organizational perspective. So for any of these programs to work, you have to have executive sponsorship, and everyone has to kind of be on the same page. And so when we look at the top of this, how do we manage risk? Risk should be reported up the chain of command all the time and on a regular basis. And people that are identifying the risk from a technical perspective, they shouldn't be afraid to list those items, because I think what happens is we find out there was a risk when there was a breach, and that's probably too late in the game to recover. So I think it's important to have that organizational leadership that empowers everyone in the chain of command, essentially, to be able to call out a risk, to be able to envision what that is, and go from there. And so as we look at, say, information risk, most of the breaches that we've seen recently, the pipeline activity, Kaseya, which is a huge ongoing problem right now, SolarWinds, all of these security issues have almost always been tied to the third party that the organization was using. So, you know, I think it's important that we are able to evaluate our supply chain risk and understand really, you know, how that's impacting our overall risk posture. And then as we look into technical risk management, and I'm going to throw compliance in just for a quick second, but we need to really focus in on how to achieve our compliance, but not necessarily how to abandon our security. They are two separate things. So let me explain. If you are secure, you may be compliant, but I think it's important to know, just because you're compliant clearly does not mean that you're secure. And so as technology leaders, I think what we have to do is strike a balance between compliance and security, and be forceful in saying compliance is not my security program. My security program is something I'm building with analyzing risk, understanding controls. And one of the things I'm going to do out of that is to have an output or a report that checks a compliance box where I have to, but I want to exceed what compliance requires, not meet it, because generally it's probably not good enough. So as we look towards managing information and cyber risk, we really need to kind of focus in on that organizational side from the top down, understanding how our third parties are involved, and understand how the technical components all merge together. And one of the first slides I showed really talked about how to select those controls across the NIST framework. And that's how we should select our controls and implement them. But we also want to bounce that through that CCOE that we talked about as well. So I'll close out here. Let me finish building this slide up. I'll close out here really quick with this slide. So first of all, zero trust is a mindset. And although it does have tools associated with it, we really want to kind of focus in on that PTO thing, where I'm talking about people, tools, and operations. So as we go to operationalize ourselves, we should also think in the terms of, what do I need to do daily, monthly, quarterly, biannual, yearly, and make sure that we document all those tasks right off the bat. And I can put this in a little circle there, but the security process must involve trained people and an adequately stocked toolbox in concert with formalized operations processes. So when we talk about formalizing operations, we have to make sure that we've got the right people using the right tools to get the right job done. And at the end of the day, zero trust is really at the heart of an organization's cyber defense. And hopefully I was able to convey that really the problem is not technical, the problem is business related. And we just have to empower, our business has to empower folks to be more secure. And that involves us building that toolbox out, building out operational processes around the people that are doing them. I have a few bonus slides I wanted to kind of throw in. They're not really related necessarily to zero trust, but we got a couple extra minutes, so I'll go ahead and throw these in, and then we can talk about this. So I worked with a guy on our team named Joe. He is an outstanding compliance guy, and he put together these slides, and I'll cover them very quickly. But the whole idea of, I have templates, I have documentation. let's just talk towards that really quick. So there's a couple of compliance misnomers. So the first thing is, if you're compliant, you must be secure. That is totally a misnomer. Also, if you see in here that, and this is Joe's quote, but I liked it. I have templates I bought from Fred's Compliance Mart, so I have documentation that's compliant. The reality is, there is no magic pill for this. You can't go write a check for $5,000 and have your compliance program written out. All of these things are very, very specific to your environment. So I put down here that documentation is the written reality and the alignment of your operational procedures. And compliance is an output of your security program, not the blueprint. So the blueprint should be zero trust in our view, and you should really attack the environment proactively using those daily, weekly, monthly type things we talked about. But again, compliance is an output. And then we move to the next slide. This will be the last slide. This is just an example of something that came from NIST's website, right? And this is a system security plan. So here's the requirement. Here's the implementation. This is what you get when you buy a canned kind of report, if you will. The control is control the connection of mobile devices, and we control the mobile devices. So this essentially is a total failure for a control, right? This description. Descriptions should list things like, and I put this down here, the 5W plus 1H, the 5 why, the what, where, why, when, who, why, and how. All those things should be addressed in your narrative around your description of how you implemented that. And so there's no magical shortcut to circumvent writing this documentation out. I think that zero trust does add a flavor that, Microsoft has written a lot of narratives out there around how their zero trust tools work, and you can absolutely use those in your narrative. But building out your compliance framework and your system security plan and all these things really need to be something where you beef it up. I'll put this up. I don't know if y'all remember the commercial years ago, "Where's the beef?" But it's kind of the situation here. All of our documentation, our focus on zero trust, our risk, how we activate the snow environment with help desk tickets and ensuring that we're meeting compliance, all that stuff is the beef around this activity. And really the beef is operations. So how do I operate the environment? Because when an auditor comes in and they ask you how you're maintaining mobile devices, they're not asking you for the tool you use or the invoice where you show you paid for it. They're really asking you how you actually operate that environment, and that's why having these things in place is a positive. This is really all I had for today. Maybe we should take some questions, Ken.
Yeah, Jake, really great session. And I've got some comments, but I'll wait until there's some. Give it a couple seconds if somebody wants to unmute and ask a question, or go ahead and just type in a question. Either way. Alex, did you have a question? While we're waiting for questions, so much of today we talked about the cloud, right? Cloud security, but most of our customers are hybrid customers. Jake, can you talk a little bit about that? I know that if you're Microsoft customers, there's so much you can do with licensing to tie the cloud to the hybrid environments, to the on-premise environments. I think one thing that would be very helpful is for folks to reach out to their cloud strategists and talk about their licensing that they have. This whole program is called You Already Own It. And time again, I see customers that just haven't implemented all the bells and whistles that come with their tools. Like if you own EMS, you have access to Cloud App Discovery. Go ahead and light it up, right? So, there's some things that the cloud strategist can help you with. Maybe you don't know certain features or capabilities are available. Maybe you just have the ability to do manual looking for some of these things, and that's fine. I know past organizations I've worked with had a very manual process that looked at risky sign-ins and impossible travels every day, but they built it into their processes so they can actually do somewhat of a management. Obviously, it wasn't something they could keep up with eventually, but there's things that we could possibly help you with as a cloud strategist. So please reach out to the You Already Own It or to your specific cloud strategist to help you with the licensing you have and get the most out of it. And with that, I'll take a pause for questions.
I can add a little bit of color there. I brought this old slide up here that we already covered, but again, that raw data. The key to victory is having visibility into what's happening in your environment, and that comes with running a tool like Sentinel or whatever product that you leverage for a SimSOAR. But alerts need to be and signals need to be angled from all systems to as few places as possible, hopefully one, and yep. And that is critical. It's also critical, and I don't know if you all agree, so feel free to jump in. But when you come into work and you're the security guy or you're the guy on the IT team, there really has to be, what am I supposed to do today? You just don't sit around waiting for the alert to pop. You should be proactively looking for stuff that could be dangerous, right? And that hunting, that kind of tier thing that we talked about here, this tier 3 thing shouldn't happen when there's just an incident. There should be hunting going on a daily basis anyway, right? And I know people are going to say, well, I don't have time to do that. I totally understand that. I was the CISO for a hotel chain. We had about 2,500 hotels, and we didn't have time to do that because we had 5 people covering telco to Wintel to security, and that was it. We didn't have time. So what we did was we actually had a third party that did proactive hunting for us, and we paid for that service. So hunting shouldn't happen because a problem popped up. That's when we react with a hunt, but we should be out. I mean, I grew up a deer hunter. I guess you guys can tell from my accent. I'm from the South. So I grew up deer hunting with my dad, and we went out and proactively looked for deer sign. And before, we just didn't plop up in a tree and hope a deer walked by. So we knew where the deer walked, and that's kind of what has to happen here. When you're hunting, it shouldn't necessarily be just a reactive thing. It should be a proactive item. And when we talk about creating the daily, weekly type activities, hunting is a part of that. Like, folks should be hunting through their environment because, all these attackers are changing their ways. There's a chance there's some abnormal activity happening out there that is 0 day, and you might find it, right? And so it's really important to be proactively hunting, and that needs to be something that's done kind of on a daily basis. So anyway, that was the color I wanted to add.
All right. Any more questions that we have? I had a couple questions about, whether the PowerPoint or the recording may be available. Absolutely, we'll send that out during the follow-up emails. We are looking for future topics, so if you have something specific you're interested in learning more about for You Already Own It, or either reach out to your cloud strategist, or by all means, maybe we'll make it into one of the topics for the next few months coming up here. So reach out to your cloud strategist or myself, and we're happy to try to incorporate that in. We want to thank you for your time today. We want to thank Jake Necessary for a great tool, great presentation today, and we look forward to talking to you again next month. So thank you.
Thank you for your time. It's a great presentation. I do like a lot up, and having the executive buy-off on this is huge because it's changing hearts and minds with a lot of these people that are running these legacy security systems, and they're not buying off to this new rubber band or this elastic security that needs to be done. Everybody's buying off on everybody working from home, and security has changed. Processes need to change. Mindsets need to change. And this is a very good slide deck to try to get people brought over to that new concept.
Well, thank you, David, for that feedback. We can't agree more. All right. Any other comments or? All right. Thank you, folks. Appreciate your time.
Thanks, everybody. Have a safe weekend.
Thank you, everybody.